As you're tracking, obviously you're going to be dealing with the drummer. He needs to have you make sure that his mix is sounding good. So what I'll do is reach over here and grab a pair of headphones, plug them into the same headphone jack that he is on the front of my headphone amp. So we're listening to the same mix, and turn on a Talkback. I'll talk to you a little bit more about that later, but turn on your Talkback mic so you can clearly talk to him. And the first thing I'll do with the drummer is say, hey, can you hear me clearly? I might even leave the door open until we get that clear line of communication so he can see. But I'm talking to him and say, hey man, can you hear me clearly? And make sure I can hear him clearly too on that Talkback mic. It's the first mic I bring up, so we're talking right away. Super critical, guys. Don't leave the drummer in the dark. I might ask, can you hear yourself in the headphones? Do you want to hear yourself in the headphones? So that way he can hear himself. He knows that he's being heard. But anyway, I'll bring up that Talkback mic right away and then start working with him on, the same old kick. Give me some kick, give me some snare, give me some hi-hat. Work through it like that. What I'll typically do instead of going through individual drums first is I'll say, hey man, just play the whole kit and jam out for a little bit, get loosened up, and then we'll go and do the individual drums. So he's rocking out, enjoying himself. First thing I'll do is mute the Talkback switch while he's jamming and start adjusting my levels. That'll give me a chance to get an overview of all of my channels and make sure that nothing's peaking, the levels are decent, and that I'm recording everything. That's the most important thing. Make sure that every track is getting where you want it to go. Once you've got that going, you can start kind of building a little mix for yourself, and then I'll bring him back in and say, hey man, that was great. So I'll start working with him on his mix. He might ask me for a little bit more kick, more snare, a little bit of hi-hat. He might want the hi-hat on one side. I can adjust that there. Whatever he wants, we're going to spend some time with that drummer making his headphone mix just right for him or her. He's going to be sitting in there all day, and at least for a few hours, and you want to make sure that he or she is hearing a really nice drum mix. If they don't want any drums in the headphones, you can do that. If they want more bass guitar, this is what I love about working with the mixing board instead of working a DAW, is instead of mousing around in the DAW with little teeny output sends, I can just reach up here, check my channel, say, oh, ride channel, he wants more ride, bring that up, put it on the right, pan it right there, and move on. The bass player says, hey, I can't hear the drummer on his mix, I can just reach up and adjust the bass player's mix separately. The drummer says, hey, I don't want to hear the cowbell, boom, turn off the cowbell. You can build your headphone mixes up here very intuitively without going away from your workflow, which is really down here and here. You're doing something else, but headphone mixes are critical, but they're right there. You don't have to switch to another screen or anything like that. You just reach up, say, hey, is that right? There you go, got you, man. All right, then you're back to what you're doing. So get your drummer's mix up there. I mentioned having a little bit of reverb available. Make sure that they can, if they want a little snare drum reverb or something like that, or the singer wants some reverb, you can do that, and make sure that the drummer might or might not want to hear that. You can do that if you know your way around on the mixing board. You can do that really quickly right here. So this is the tool when you're working for big bands. If you're working for just a singer or just an instrument or working by yourself, the DAWs are a great way to do that. But if you've got a full 4 or 5 piece band coming in, if you're doing that kind of work, guys, consider getting yourself at least a basic mixing board, like a 24 channel mixing board. Might be a very good investment for you with a couple of outboard preamps for that. But if you can get a mixing console that has decent preamps, good EQ, and it fits your budget, you're going to be tracking bands a lot faster. I'm sure there's guys out there that'll differ with me. They're probably really fast with their DAWs, but I'm telling you, when you're under pressure, having the right tool for the right job, having the right tool for the job is critical, and this is the tool for those big band projects. Yeah, over here I have some. If you watch some of my previous videos, you might have seen me discuss my old Reverb hardware devices and the way I still use those. But here's kind of an example of where I'll do that. I use these as stereo effects returns. One One of the things about this console is it doesn't have a stereo effects return section, which is kind of surprising because most consoles do, but this is no problem for me here because I've got these guys right here. I can use these as stereo or mono effects returns. So this is a good example of where I can still use my Outboard effects modules. There's 2 lexicons over there. I've even got my old Quadraverb, believe it. I never use the Quadraverb anymore, but it still works, guys. The Quadraverb is still kicking 30, 40 years later. I can't believe. What's funny about the Quadraverb is I have presets that I've saved in the Quadraverb from the 80s. 88, 89, 90, that's how old I am. I was recording back there with it. The Quadraverb was my first effects reverb box, and I'd save settings in there that are still in there. Talk about good memory. It's never crashed, it's never glitched out. I've been through lots of different effects devices, but the Quadraverb, I won't say it sounds great, it sounds okay, but just the fact that it still turns on and remembers all those presets is pretty amazing. So maybe we'll do a show just about the Alesis Quadraverb in the Hall of Fame. But anyway, I digress. You can easily return those effects for quick headphones mixes. Like if the drummer wanted some snare reverb, you could turn up channel 3. It's sending out to the out of the mixing board to the lexicon reverb, and the stereo returns are coming up here. So that's a mono send. It's going out mono, getting into the reverb device, it's coming back in stereo, and I bring it up right there. I can adjust the return level right there, or the send level. Usually I'll leave those around 0 and just have the send determine how much reverb is being used. It's nice if you want, you can engage the EQ if you want to EQ your reverb return. That's nice up here. A lot of effects returns don't have that, so this is nice to have that. If you wanted something less bright, you could use less, or whatever kind of EQ you want. Usually I'll leave that flat and just give them a basic reverb. Most of the reverb presets are sounding pretty cool already. I think here I just have a nice reverb plate. Next to it, I think I've got a concert hall. And then what do I have? I think I have a little drum room. A nice little drum room that I like from Lexicon. What's it called? I'll go into more of my presets later, but I just have a nice little drum room that I like to put on snares and sometimes on tom-toms that I just love to pop up and put that on the mix for the drummers. So a couple plates and reverbs for the singers and instruments, and then one for the drum room, and I'm golden. And of course, those all come down through and blend with the stereo mix if you wanted to mix down on the console, but we're going to be mixing in the box a little bit later on. I'm just using the console for tracking. I don't mix on the board too much anymore. I do most of my mixing in the computer, but I am doing some summing at the console. I'm using this as a summing mixer, and I'll get into that a little bit more on another occasion. One more thing I will show you. I have some things going on down here that I'll show you about. The most important is the return of the metronome click from the computer. I have the metronome click. In my case, I like to use a cowbell. I have the output from that metronome section. If you go into the metronome preferences, and you can adjust where that output goes. I've assigned that to a channel, in this case channel 30 in mono. I just use one channel for that, and I assign that cowbell click to 30 so that I can adjust or mute my metronome right there without having to go to the DAW. So if I'm sitting over here, I don't have to reach for the mouse. I can just mute it, bring it up or down, and I can send a separate level to any musician, including the drummer. Obviously, it's really important that the drummer hears the click very clearly, but you don't want to be blowing him out so it's hurting him. You can also pan it in his left ear or his right ear if you prefer. Whatever you want, you can send them a different mix of that click, get that just right so they can hear it clearly, but you're not blasting them out. And then you can turn yours down. If you don't want to hear the click or just a little bit of it or a lot of it, that's not necessarily going to be affecting what the drummer is listening to. You can even EQ the click if you want a little bit of that, if you want to dig it. But well, sometimes when you hit that mute button, it will mute what's going to their mix. You just have to press the pre-fader button right there so that what you're doing down here does not affect what goes to that pre-fader button. If you need, usually it's a happy medium. Reverb returns. Right here you see I have this taped off. That's another topic, but this is my output from my DAW. And I'll explain why I've taped that into that position right there. It's a little unconventional, but I like having the output, the master output from my DAW coming up right here. And I use that as an effects return for my reverb plugins, if that makes any sense. We'll go into that a little bit later. But that's my DAW output right there on 31 and 32. I don't have to do that if I didn't want to have my DAW output there. It's just like any other channel. I could not use those for that and just have another instrument coming out of there if I wanted to do that. But I rarely use all 32 channels when I'm mixing down, or I don't need that many channels, especially now that I'm mixing in the box. I don't need all these channels to try to build a mix here like we used to do back in the day. That's how we used to mix, guys. We didn't have a computer, and we would just have the tape roll, and you had to do everything out here and build your mix manually, old school style. Reverbs, you didn't have any plugins or anything like that. If you wanted a compressor, you had to use the patch bay here to patch in an outboard compressor. So you had to know about how to use your patch bay. As you can see, I don't use it so much anymore. I do use it, but it used to be, we would use dozens of these little TT patch cables. And at the end of a mixdown, this would just be a spaghetti jungle of wires. And then of course it all got unplugged for the next session. So that was kind of a pain in the butt that you would spend a lot of time building up your patch for the mixdown, and then you've got a band coming in the next day. You had to undo all that and get ready for the next band. And there was no recall. You couldn't just open up the project in your computer, everything pops back to where it was. You had to write everything down, or we would take little pictures, take snapshots of, we did have digital cameras, but we would take a picture or write down your settings. It was very tricky. Total recall was something that engineers wanted a lot. It was very important that somebody could come back and remix a project. So we were always furiously writing down data and trying to remember where we set our faders, how we set our reverb returns. It was a big mess and a lot of notes and pictures that we had to take. Now, of course, you don't have to worry about any of that. It's all stored in your session. And so you just pop it up. You can even store all your little comments and notes in your DAW as well. So we're into good times now. What else do I do over here? That's about it, I think. My effects returns, extra outputs. Like I said, sometimes if I have 3 or 4 tracks of percussion, a tambourine, a triangle, some congas, I'm going to track those on separate channels, record them on separate channels, but I might put them all into a stereo bus and maybe drop an overall compressor across all of them, nice stereo compressor across all the percussion instruments, or most of them anyway, and then have the stereo output from that bus come out over my mixing board, and hard left and right for wide stereo, and then adjust the panning of the percussion instruments in the DAW. So if you've got the hi-hat just a little, the tambourine just a little bit over here, you can adjust that all there instead of doing it at your mixing board. And then you've got all your percussion coming up right up the middle. And I usually just set that at 0 and then make any detail adjustments in the DAW so that the next time I come back to that mix, it's exactly where I left it. So that's something nice. Here's another keyboard return. I've got my Roland Integra 7. It's not just a synthesizer, it's got all kinds of sample sounds. It's an amazing Roland. It was Roland's flagship device for a long time. I think now their most advanced keyboard is going to be the Phantom, if I'm not mistaken. Keyboard guys, correct me if there's something that Roland makes, but I love Roland sounds. They've got all kinds of great drum sounds in Roland. Percussion, drum kit's amazing. The same sounds they use for their V drums are available without buying the drum kit. You can just use your computer or any trigger to sample those beautiful drum sounds, in addition to all kinds of orchestral sounds. I think the Integra 7 has 6,000 something different sounds, analog synths, organs, everything you can imagine under the sun is available in one little rack mount box that I have over there. And so I have that coming up right here. If somebody needs some kind of a MIDI return, I'll bring that up here on this channel and not take up one of my other tracks. Usually, like I said, I'm using 12 tracks for drums. I'll do 2 tracks for bass guitar. That is, one is going to be a direct input with no processing, in case I want to reamp that later. And then the other, I'm going to use one of my amp simulators, either my Sans amp, which is great to plug into, or maybe one of my universal audio plugins. I've got a couple different bass amp and cabinet simulators that sound just like if you had a bass amp mic'd up, but you're not rattling the whole building. So I love doing that. Additional keys, if somebody brings in their own keyboard or synthesizer, I'll plug that in 15 and 16. I usually have a stereo output. They can be sitting right in the room with me, and I'll just plug that right in. I might record that with MIDI as well, so I'm taking a MIDI recording of what they're doing in case we want to switch the instrument around later and we want to change the piano sound or the organ sound. But usually they have a sound that they like or the band likes, and I'll just record the stereo output directly from their keyboard into my DAW, as well as a MIDI feed. So I'm recording onto a MIDI track at the same time. And then a couple tracks for guitar, right there. 1 or 2 guitars, or a stereo guitar, or stereo acoustic guitar I do a lot. Or a lot of the time we'll have a guitar player record and then double himself. I'll do that, and then you can pan those. And then I'll put the solo guitar elsewhere. I might drop the solo guitar over here. Down here we're getting into vocals, a couple tracks for lead vocals, a couple tracks for background vocals. Over here, 23 and 24 I usually just use as you never know, it's kind of a spillover. Horns, strings, percussion, whatever you want. More vocals, whatever you got, 23 and 24. You might have a sound effect bed or some music under, you never know, so I keep that up there. And then it spills over onto channels 25 through 32. And that's about it. If I needed more analog returns, I could start using these. I don't think I've ever done that. If you had a really broad mix or an orchestra or something, and you wanted to mix it on the console, you could start using these as additional returns. Since you're not using these faders for microphones anymore, they are available for additional mixdown faders. You've got the same EQ that you have down here. The faders are shorter, but they sound and have all the features that these do, and that's where your panning knobs would start actually coming into play again. If you were doing that, you could pan up here. You can do everything up here in this section that you can down here. So this channel, this console, as you see, you can have it come up to 72 different fader returns. If you wanted to, you could have 72 different channels. There's additional 8 slots here that they have in this chassis in case you wanted to have another 8 channel strips. There's room for that over here for a total of 40 or 80 different channels. So my boy Albert here occupies this space. I find this is a nice little area for a microphone, a mouse pad. This is kind of where I sit, and I've got this little screen here for easy access, so I can adjust my typically my Apollo devices. I keep them all parked right here. My Apollo console right there. Whatever plugins I'm using, I can open and close those right there. Compressors. This is where my Apollo screen. I might also pop a little counter up over here so I can see where the counter is. Or maybe there's also a meter bridge that I might pop up here if I wanted to use the internal meter bridge instead of looking over at my main screen. I can do that. But so I've got myself situated over here so I can kind of watch the performance in here, talk to the band, use my talkback switch, change my speakers, my volume, answer the phone, you know, whatever I want to do, I can kind of do it from right here. I like this little area right here. Plus it gets me out of the way of that area, so another musician, the songwriter or the producer or whoever's running the session can stand there, talk to the talent, and kind of take command of the session. I like telling people, go ahead. They say, can you turn up the snare? I'm like, go ahead, it's on 3. They say, oh, right here, yeah, just push, you know, turn up the feet. That get the musicians involved on your mix, and they love it. People love getting their hands on stuff instead of having to ask your permission. I'll say, just go ahead, turn up bass, it's right there, boom. And as long as they don't have chicken greasy fingers, that's fine. And, you know, most people don't. So just, yeah, get your band in on the mix, get out of the way, don't hog the board, you know, let people have fun. They're paying you to use the equipment. Who says that you have to be the only one to touch it? On mixdowns, I have a different feeling about that. You know, don't touch my mixdown. I'll chop your arm off. If we're mixing down and you reach over and push something, I'm going to yell at you. If somebody says they want to bring up the snare, I'll do it for them on mixdown. That's a little more critical, where every little increment counts. And if somebody just reaches up and turns something up, you know, that's kind of a no-no. But, you know, if people don't know that, they're not going to get in trouble for doing that. I like to get bands and people involved in their own songwriting, and they're going to learn a little about recording as well, and the mixing console, and you know, it's a lot of fun that way too. Plus you can kind of relax, work your plugins, work your talkback, and get out of the way and let the band be involved in their own process there.